Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of our guests around the world. I am Doug Silliman, president of the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and I am very pleased to welcome all of you to today's program, Escaping a Zero-Sum Struggle Between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Before we get into the program, let me give you a few technical details about our program, our Zoom platform, and how to interact with our panelists. Today's program will be on the record. We are recording the program, which will be available for viewing on AGSIW's website, www.agsiw.org, in the next few days. Your audio will be muted during the conversation, but you will be able to ask questions to our speakers using the Q&A function button at the bottom of your screen. Please click on that button, type your question, hit enter or return, and our moderator will pose the questions to our speakers. So with the administrative preliminaries out of the way, let me introduce our guests for today's program. You can also find the full biographies of our speakers and moderator at the link to this program on AGSIW's website. Ambassador Seyed Hossein Mousavian is a Middle East security and nuclear policy specialist at Princeton University. He is a former diplomat who served as Iran's ambassador to Germany, head of the Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council, spokesman for Iran in its nuclear negotiations, and in several other official capacities. Dr. Abdulaziz Al Sager is the chairman of the Gulf Research Center, president of Sager Group Holding, and a member of the Mecca Province Council in Saudi Arabia. He has a special interest in Gulf strategic issues and is a regular contributor and commentator in international and regional media. Ambassador Mousavian and Dr. Sager collaborated on an article published in the January 31st issue of The Guardian entitled, "We Can Escape a Zero-Sum Struggle Between Iran and Saudi Arabia If We Act Now." And I will post a link to that article in the chat function for all of you who may not have had the opportunity to see it yet. And to moderate our discussion on this important topic, we are very pleased to have with us Ms. Deborah Amos, award-winning international affairs correspondent for National Public Radio. She earlier worked for ABC News, for the Public Broadcasting System, PBS, and for NPR as a foreign correspondent. She has won numerous awards for her reporting on Iraq and the Middle East, as well as the Edward R. Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award. So I'd like to turn the microphone over to Deborah Amos to begin our discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here. I have been in both of your countries going back to the 90s. So I've seen great change and not great change. I want to start with something that you both must have written together. And it says in your article, "We remain at the mercy of a single miscalculation that could turn the protracted Cold War between our states hot, potentially ushering a disastrous consequence for the entire region." This week, we have two news stories that can upend politics. One is the first strike for the Biden administration against an Iranian militia, and the Biden administration's pledge to release the CIA's assessment of responsibility for the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. I want to ask both of you if these are the kinds of events that can turn this contest hot. And if not, does it at least change the stakes? Let me start with you, Dr. Abdulaziz.
Well, let me start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for the Gulf Institute for this invitation. And thank you, Deborah, for moderating our session with Ambassador Hossein Mousavian. Both incidents that you mentioned are important. I think there was a big concern regarding the attack on the U.S. forces, in north of Iraq, particularly in Erbil, last week, and that was a concern. At the same time, there was too many media story about releasing the non-classified report about Jamal Khashoggi by the CIA. I'm not surprised on both sides, because I think with regard to the report that concerning Saudi Arabia and Jamal Khashoggi to be released by the CIA, it was held before by President Trump, but at the same time, we will all are anxious to read it and to see what's in it there. We've heard the White House saying it's only after the phone call that will take place between President Biden and King Salman. We're going to see that report. The phone call took place last night, and it was an extremely interesting phone call that discussed a lot of the regional issue and the important subject. Whatever fact is there on that report, we would love to see it. We would love to read it. And if there is any answer, that is required by the Saudi side, we would love to see that. At the same time, on the Erbil and what happened on the attack, I think from my point of view, we look at the U.S. concern in the Middle East too. One is the nuclear program, because that's on the non-proliferation issues is extremely important, and it's important for the safety and the security of Israel. The second issue, of course, is the safety of the U.S. Troops and soldiers in the region. So, we're sure that this is a great concern. This is why we've had the Iraqi president and the prime minister of Iraq speaking to President Biden, trying to endorse. And we all in the region need to endorse and support the strength and having a strong centralized government in Iraq. Whether that can be achieved in the short term or no, but I'm sure one of the area of great cooperation in Iraq, we see it between the US and the Gulf countries, of course, is two. One, containing ISIS and the way how to deal with terrorist operation and the militia attack that taking place. And second, of course, is containing external intervention in Iraq, being it Turkey or Iran, to reduce that sort of spheres of influence and intervention on Iraq, because still we would like to see a unified Iraq, very national government that we would like to see, and a strong central government that can deal with all important issues for Iraq.
Ambassador Mousavian, will there be factions in Iran who will want to escalate this, who will want to take a punch back?
First of all, let me say good morning or good afternoon or good evening to the participants wherever they are. And thanks also you, Deborah, moderating, and thanks to the Arab Institute in Washington for arranging this event. On the two issues you mentioned, frankly speaking, I don't believe this is a good start for Biden. Israelis, they have been attacking Syria, and an Israeli official 4 or 5 months ago said they have launched over 1,000 attacks. I believe Israeli attacks always has been in coordination with the US, and now the US attack also is in coordination with the Israelis. This is what has been going on for 3 years, 4 years, hundreds of such attacks with no solution. If I were President Biden, I would think about solution rather than these radical steps to radicalize the tension in the region. A year ago, I wrote an op-ed and suggested a quadrilateral military contact between Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and the US. Because I believe powers like Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, they need to sit together, at least at the military level, to have a contact to contain such tensions, because really nobody knows where these attacks are coming from, and it can take every side to more tension, more conflict, and ultimately to a war. On the Iranian side, frankly speaking, although we have two major different school of thought, for example, one is pro-JCPOA nuclear deal, one is opposing, and the two different school of thought, they have different ideas about how to have a regional policy, of course. But both of them, they really want a stable Iraq, because Iran has over 800 kilometers of common border with Iraq. Instability in Iraq means directly and quickly instability in Iran. That's why this is a red line. I really don't believe anyone is going to welcome such a conflict, instabilities in Iraq. That's why if I were President Biden, I would immediately go back to nuclear deal. I would immediately invite the regional countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, for a dialogue for peace, for negotiation on security, I would immediately try to find a solution. I propose already a quadrilateral military contact between the 4 or 5 powers in the region to prevent such escalating measures.
Dr. Abdulaziz, I'm sure the two of you had to talk about the most sensitive parts of how you would get there. You know, things like proxies, that has to be dealt with. Things like range of missiles. These are all issues, to bring everybody together takes a lot. Can we talk about where you could start? In a piece in Bloomberg yesterday, there was a piece that said maritime security. That's what both sides could agree on. Is there a place to start this dialogue before we get all the way to everybody sits at the table, which seems impossible?
Well, I'm sure there are areas of agreement between both sides, both they agree with it. And at the same time, I think, when we talk about confidence build measure, that's another issue. But I think the key issue for Saudi Arabia, all what we would like to see is to see a change in the attitude and the behavior and the way how Iran approach some of the subject. And I'm not here doing any blaming policy to anybody or so on. I think I just want to clarify that there are key principles in terms of Saudi Arabia. Iran is a big country, it's a neighbor country. They deserve to have the good life, for the people, and the people there, they deserve to have, the good and a great development, plan, that they deserve there. Saudi Arabia has nothing to do in terms of the regime. The regime has been chosen, selected by the people, by the Iranians. So we have nothing to do about the regime. This is the Iranian choice. In no way in Saudi Arabia we would like to see another war, whether it's small or big, by proxy or direct or anything like this. So that's totally, in terms of principle with regard to Saudi Arabia. Having a negotiation with Iran, we welcome that, and it is important and it's necessary. And it's mandatory. It's all there. The only thing that we would like to see, we don't want to have the negotiation for the sake of negotiation. We would like to see it based on a principle that agreed, and this is where on the article myself and Dr. Mousavian, we've discussed the key principles that we thought are important for both countries to respect and to endorse. If those principles are met, I am sure we find a great idea to start. But going back to your question, I think I'd like to define it into 2 areas. One, a strategic area, which is really the B5+1 is the Security Council. This is the nuclear program and the missile program. And in the missiles, let me clarify one point. I don't think Saudi Arabia is against Iran in terms of developing or manufacturing their own missiles program. This is a sovereign issue. It belongs to Iran. If it's not allowed within the JCPOA, then Iran has to respect that. But as far as manufacturing or building their own technology for their own domestic use, or even country-to-country relation, nobody is against that. What we are against is seeing those missiles on the hand of a violent non-state actor, on the hand of a militia, using the missiles as a weapon. So this is changing the equation of terrorism from an individual organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS to a state-sponsored organization when they have their hands on such a missiles. The other issue, of course, that I see is all the other area that we can agree into. In other words, we respect Iran neighborhood. We both, share a lot of important and the Gulf water, between us with them. We are both concerned about the maritime security and the safety and the security of the oil and gas platform. So we need to protect that because this is important for Iran and for us. We both today, need to see a better oil prices. We both would like to see a much more collaboration. So there are area of collaboration, area of understanding, that we can build. For instance, in 2004 at the Gulf Research Center, we came up with the idea of a Gulf Free Zone of WMD. We still believe that this is a valid point, and this could be an area of understanding between both sides that we can have a Gulf Free Zone of WMD. Because we both are suffering from that, and we do not want to see a nuclear tension in the region because this will lead into a lot of consequences that we are not interested in that one. So there are areas of agreement that can be agreed. There are non-strategic issues that it can be discussed between both sides, and we can move toward that one. We believe negotiation and meeting and discussing, it's a must and it's important, and it can bring a lot of the misunderstanding and the misperception also from both sides. For instance, we are always blamed by the Iranian that we want to have a strong military American presence. And that's, the American presence, they are there with or without us. They have two interests they used to cover. One interest that used to be for the US, what they call a vital interest, the energy, and the other is the third party destiny that the US is concerned about, which is Asia. Asia today is 65% of their energy comes out of the state of Hormuz, and Japan, South Korea, India is a strong alliances of the US. So the US are not only protecting their interests, but also their alliances interest there.
Ambassador Mousavian, until now, as far as I understand, the Iranian government is not interested in talking about their missiles at all, not in JCPOA, not any place. Can you put that down the line far enough after you build these confidence building measures, or is it possible that Iran will never talk about their missiles?
Deborah, I think what we need, first of all, between Iran and Saudi, Iran and the GCC, we need some fundamentals which can guide a potential dialogue. I believe the first and the most important issue to be agreed between Iran and Saudi is about zero hegemony in the region, because Iran is worried about the Saudi policy of hegemony. Saudi is worried about Iranian policy of hegemony. This is a mutual perspective we both have. Second, we need to understand we have, as Abdulaziz said, we have legitimate interest and legitimate role, each of us. Saudi Arabia and Iran, they are two powerhouses. They have legitimate role, legitimate interest. We need to understand, we need to respect, we need to preserve our roles and mutual interest. Third, as Abdulaziz said, we have already introduced principles, 12 principles in the Guardian op-ed. I'm not going to go through to all of them, but we need the principles, like preserving sovereignty, like non-interference, like total integrity of each country. I'm not going to go to, but it's very important about the nuclear, what you mentioned, and Abdulaziz mentioned. We have already introduced the idea of nuclear weapon-free zone in the Persian Gulf and WMD-free zone in the Persian Gulf as one of our principles. Therefore, if we agree in such a broader issues like nuclear weapon-free zone, WMD-free zone in the region, therefore, the issues like missile or nuclear could be addressed much more easy. Then, definitely we need to start confidence building measures. I always have said we need to step one is to stop hostile rhetorics. If we are going to enter a dialogue, we cannot at the same time have hostile rhetorics. We need to tone it down. We need to stop it. And then we need to understand threat perception of each other. Whether this is real or imagined, it doesn't matter. We have to understand what is really the threat perception of GCC outside of Saudi Arabia. And they also need to understand the Iranian threat perceptions. Then we have a lot of important common interests as CBM, confidence building measures, we can immediately start. I would say number one is Corona is very easy. It is a disaster for whole region. Number two is maritime security. Number three is energy security. Number four, we have a lot of environmental issues as a common interest. Number five is drug trafficking. Number six is organized crime. We have a lot of such issues, which is not really a contentional issues between the two countries, which would be really good for both of us. Then we need a plan of action. As we have mentioned in the article with Abdulaziz, plan of action is a direct negotiations should start between the two countries bilaterally. And I suggest the first and the most important is to revive the security pact already we signed in 1999 or 2000. And then we need to start to reestablish the diplomatic ties, because as far as we don't have embassies, we don't have diplomats. How do we want to follow all these good issues? And then we need a broader dialogue, as Abdulaziz mentioned, about the security and stability in the whole region, 8 countries around the Persian Gulf. I would suggest the best is for Secretary General of United Nations to have an initiative to establish a dialogue, a forum of dialogue between 8 countries to start all these important issues. And the end state, Deborah, is very important. I believe at the beginning, we need to agree that the end state would be a regional security cooperation system like OSCE, like EU, which every country, 8 countries, they would have equal fitting. There would be no hegemony. There would be full cooperation economically, politically, military, security, and everything.
Dr. Abdulaziz, I had an interview last year with a Saudi diplomat, high ranking, and he said, look, at the end of the day, what I really care about with Iran is the sanctions, because when they have money, they get up to mischief in Syria, in Yemen, in Gaza. And so that's what we care about. We care about squeezing that money source. Could you imagine in any way that Saudi Arabia would back Iran for cessation of those sanctions, which have been incredibly painful to the Iranian people?
I don't think anybody in Saudi Arabia is happy or satisfied by seeing the Iranian people are suffering from the sanction, by the way. But this is a result of a government policy in Iran that resulted to that. And this sanction was imposed by the US, not by us. We all have to obey the order and obey the sanction because of the sensitivity and the type of structure of the sanction that has been imposed. You know, it has a great impact. Even China and Russia, the 2 strong friends of Iran, you know, they obeyed that one and they followed the sanction and the, you know, that has been imposed. The question is, all what we are talking about it here is a change of attitude, change of behavior. We want Iran to be the wealthiest country in the region. They deserve to be wealthy. They deserve to have a great development in their country, but use the resources for the development instead of using the resources to expand your spheres of influence by using a sectarianism as a dimension on the other neighboring country, being it Iraq or Syria or Lebanon or Yemen. That's the whole issue. So when this high official said he's concerned about the resources, he's not concerned that, you know, Iran should not sell oil or should not have resources. No, we want Iran to have the resources. It's a big country. It has a lot of neighborhood, great potentiality. They are a large energy, you know, producer. They're important for many countries in the world. But all what we are saying, instead, if you use this money to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, to disturb the government, the Lebanese government, instead of using it in Syria to support a regime like Al-Assad there and to have a battle or support the militia there, or the 47 different Hashd al-Sha'bi militia in Iraq or Houthi in Yemen, use it for the development in Iran. We will be happy to contribute and to be as an investor in Iran, you know, if that situation happen and take place.
Ambassador, you write in your points, you do talk about sovereignty. Can I understand that to mean that Iran should move out of Syria? That is a sovereignty issue, or do you not see it that way?
First of all, sovereignty, when I say it's important to address mutual assurances for respecting sovereignty between 8 countries in the region. Because you heard from Abdulaziz, they are worried about Iranian interference or sovereignty. And Iran also has really the same concern about Saudi policy, because you heard John Kerry when Obama was after diplomacy to resolve the nuclear issue peacefully. You heard John Kerry said that in every meeting with Saudis, Emiratis, Israelis, they were asking us to attack Iran. You have heard Saudi officials supporting Trump's maximum pressure policy. Everybody understood this is the full-scale economic, political, cyber war against Iran, the most sanctions and pressures. And Saudi supported Trump's policy against Iran. It was 100% confrontational policies. And we are talking about the regional issues, Deborah. regional issues like Syria, like Yemen, like all Libya, all this happened after 2011, after Arab Spring. But you have read the State Department documents, WikiLeaks, in 2005, 2010, even before all these regional issues, Saudi, Emirati, Bahrainis, they have been asking the US officials to attack Iran. And if you go a little bit more back, I mean, we have a Saddam invasion of Iran with Saudi and GCC, they supported. All this is about regime change, threatening the sovereignty. What Abdulaziz said, it is really positive. I really like it because it's very important to change the course, because Iranians, they feel threatened because the US policy of regime change, the US policy of all options on the table, and what we have seen during Trump always have been supported by Saudis, by Israelis. Tehran really feels a complete threatened by neighbors, by Israelis, by Saudis. But for a good relation in the region, the tone and the language of Abdulaziz is, I think, is very constructive and helpful. We should have also, we need to understand, as I said, I have written, Deborah, in my book, just published 2 months ago, about a new security and cooperation structure in the Persian Gulf. I have explained all concern Abdulaziz said and more, because in order to come to peace, you need to understand the threat perception of your neighbor. What Abdulaziz said, you would find all in my book, maybe 20, 30 more concerns, because we have to be sincere and honest. We have to understand our neighbors' threat perception, and also they need to understand. We don't want Saudi Arabia, our neighbor, to sit with Israel or the US to attack Iran, to sanction Iran, to kill JCPOA, to go for a military strike on Iran, and that's the way to go. On Syria, I believe, first of all, we need to resolve our bilateral issues, and then we need to find an arrangement for the Persian Gulf for the 8 neighbors. And then we need to go for a common understanding or the same principles Abdulaziz and we have introduced in our op-ed. I believe we need to introduce the same principles. Hopefully, I would be able to work with Abdulaziz to talk together whether we can introduce the same principles for crisis management in the region, Deborah. We have crises in Syria, we have in Iraq, we have in Iran, Yemen, we have in Bahrain, we have a lot of, we have in Libya. We need Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Iraq, the big powers, even the other members of GCC. We need to respect all of them as a member to agree on some principles. For example, the rule of majority or the will of majority, peaceful settlement for the crisis, immunity for the minorities, power sharing in every country. In Iraq, we have Shia is majority. In Syria, we have Sunni majority. In Afghanistan, we have Sunni majority. You know, we need to respect the rule or the will of the majorities. Such a principle, new constitution, election, peace, reconstruction of these countries, these are a type of principles that we need to agree as the principles for Iran and Saudi Arabia, Iran and international powers, the regional powers and international powers to work together for crisis management in the region. At the end, we need to resolve the crisis because we cannot have only stability in one country or part of this region as long as we have crises, wars, civil wars, terrorism in other parts of the region.
So I'm going to begin with a question that we have in our Q&A box. Oh, hang on. Dr. Aziz, I feel that you need to respond. Please go.
It's not I need to respond, but I just want to say it's very important to have a great security architecture for the region. And so far we have 4 initiatives now as far as security architecture for the region. We have the US MESA, we have the Russian proposal, we have the European proposal, and we have the Amos proposal by President Rouhani that he launched it in September 2019, which is non-aggression, non-intervention. I think they all sound good, but maybe what we need is to find a common interest between all of us there. How can we find, because ultimately we don't want to depend on external resources to provide security for our region. We would like to have this to be within the region to be structured. And if we have a security structure that guarantee the safety and the security of every one of the country, being it a small state or a big state, respecting all the principles that we have discussed about it, then we have less requirement for an external presence in the region here, which is not in the interest of Iran, not in the interest of us, and so, but at the same time, a guarantor role is important. That guarantor can be B5+1, maybe the United Nations, EU, all of this, they can play because, the interest is, for everybody to have a secure and stable region, as far as we are concerned there. So, what I'm saying that, yes, we need to find a formula. We need to agree in it. We need to address everybody concerned. And we start with the perception. As, Dr. Hussein said, that, perception from our point of view might be different than the Iranian, but at least we explain to each other, why did we have to request a US presence in the region? Why is that was important for us? Because of the interventionist policy and the expansionist policy. We saw it from Iran intervening in all the domestic matter, and so that have justified for the reason that sort of attitude and behavior.
I'm going to take a question from the audience. There's lots of them. So if anybody else wants to, please do. And this comes from Janet Alberta. She says, I want to compliment both on their article in The Guardian, very well received by many diplomats working towards regional stability. However, the issue of having a regional security framework that we all have been pleading for and still plead for kind of falls quiet if you talk about it with relevant interlocutors. My question, what should be the first step now to have both countries talking to each other again? And how can we, as the international community, help beyond JCPOA? So it's happened before. The Saudis and the Iranians have talked before. So what practically has to happen before we see that meeting? Let's start with you, Dr. Abdulaziz, and then Ambassador Mousavian.
Thank you for the question. I think the key principle is changing attitude and messages that we receive. You can't, convince the Saudi leadership that Iran wanted to have a security and peaceful talk if the same message, keep repeating, coming from different side on Iran, taking a hardliner approach in that one. Being it, we can close the State of Hormuz, the monarch system is this, all the sort of negative messages that we get. And we need to have the political will and the agreement from both sides, to say, yes, we both agree. We have the principle that we are agreeing in it, and we have the agenda that we would like to discuss, whether it's an environment, as Dr. Hussein said, or, being it the maritime issue or intervention or sectarianism issue, whatever is the issues that we need to talk. But at least we can start somewhere by a goodwill from both sides, by respecting each other, and by changing attitude that concern both and deal with the perception of both concerned.
Okay, let me go to another question, and we'll go to Ambassador Mousavian. This is a combined question. A couple of people asked this, and it's on the U.S. role. What can the Biden administration do to ease tensions specifically? How much or how little U.S. support do you both foresee as optimal in pursuing some of the objectives you presented in your article? This week, we've seen some very specific Biden administration behavior. One is a bombing run. Two is the release of something that will cause controversy in the relationship. Let me start with you, Ambassador. What specifically can the Biden administration do?
I believe the most important issue, the Biden administration should decide whether the U.S. Last 70 years of strategy he wants to continue. For 70 years, the U.S. core strategy in the region has been dominating the region and hegemony policy. Does the U.S. want to continue the same policy or not? If yes, then does the U.S. want to dominate every country? If yes, then Iran would resist. Then we would have conflict like the conflicts we have had during the last 40 years. But if the U.S. decides to leave the region or to end the hegemonic policy, it is for Biden and the US to decide. Then the question is, what would be the alternative? Are we going to have another superpower, whether this is China or Russia, to fill the gap? Or the idea which has been followed during President Trump, alliance between Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, to create a type of NATO to confront Iran, or to go for a collective regional security and cooperation between 8 countries around the Persian Gulf. It is depending to the Biden and the US to decide which policy do they want. I believe the best and the most sustainable, if Biden really wants to manage the crisis in the Middle East, first of all, he needs to go for a peaceful settlement for Israeli Palestinians, and then he needs to help a peaceful settlement. He needs to support a peaceful settlement between Iran, Saudi, Iran, and Arab neighbors. These two cards in the Middle East, as long as the US administration is not going to have to support a peaceful settlement for these two type of crises, we are not going to get to anywhere. That's why we have already, Deborah, Resolution 598. It has already called on Secretary General to talk with the 8 countries about a sustainable security and peace. I believe Biden can support the resolution. The P5, they can give mandate to Secretary General to sit with 8 countries and to talk about the steps. Then Abdulaziz said, I'm also reiterating, we have a lot of easy confidence building measures, which really does not need condition or precondition. We can talk to each other rather than talk at each other. Why we should talk about each other with the other countries? We are neighbors, we are brothers, we can sit together and we can talk together. Abdulaziz and I, we are talking for many years and we really like each other, we respect each other, we understand each other. Why not our 2 leaders continue the same mindset? And then what 6 examples I gave, Corona, maritime security, energy security, drug trafficking, there is no cost, this is all benefits. And then I already said, we need to stop the hostile rhetorics in order to facilitate a dialogue. All these issues we can start before a regional arrangement. The question was about this. And for the regional arrangement, I think this is the best way to go for the resolution adopted by United Nations Security Council, and peace between regional countries, collective security cooperation in the region, rather than other models of alliance, which would only increase the tensions and hostilities.
Dr. Abdulaziz, everything seems to be based on sequencing. Of course, the United States, if 8 countries had a security agreement, you wouldn't need the United States. The question is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And so that's my question to you. How does that sequencing work?
I think the big role for the US could be, honestly, is to be a sponsor of such a talk and a sponsor of sort of, agreeing between the two sides, because any agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia under the auspices of the US and the understanding and encouragement of that one, that will help to de-escalate tension. A lot, and by de-escalating tension means the US troop in the region will be safe. They are not going to get any attack by any militia supported by any party. It's going to ensure the flow of energy supply to Southeast Asia and the Asian country, that which is the alliances of the US, is going to again reassess, because we understand the US concerned about China and Russia role in the region. And I can, we all stand on that, quite well, and understand that quite well. So we understand that. But if the US play the role of encouragement, sponsoring, putting the two parties together, bringing agenda, together, it will help a lot.
Ambassador Mousavian, this is a question from Barbara Slavin. How confident are you, and this is a question about sequencing, confident are you that Iran will agree to meet with the US under EU auspices to sequence return to the JCPOA? Could the US strike in Syria and threats of new condemnation at the IAEA derail this?
Iran and the P5+1, they were meeting together while Israel was attacking Syria. I mean, I said this is not something new. I believe every Israeli attack on Syria have been in coordination with the US, and the US attack on Syria also has been in coordination with Israel. I believe this is for Iranian, this is not something new, but this is not a good signal from Biden, which is going to have a different diplomacy from President Trump. He is exactly following the same policies. On JCPOA, he's delaying, no lifting sanctions, putting condition and precondition for negotiations, and then going to regional attacks and so. About the question of Barbara, I think that the issue is the US member of JCPOA or not? If yes, President Biden should immediately issue an executive order to revoke President Trump's executive order. Then the US would become a member of JCPOA. Then the US and Iran and the other world powers, they can sit together and discuss about the sequences, about compliance for compliance. But the US is going to come to a meeting which is not member. This is the issue. And I really don't know what Tehran would decide. It is 50-50 situation, because the question is in Tehran how they want to come to a meeting which they are not member. The US should first become a member and then come to the meeting.
Would if Biden did the executive order, would that move 50-50 to 60-40?
Yes, I believe if he issues the executive order, it means the US is a member. Then the question would be, how do we go for compliance? Then if there is a meeting between P5+1 and Iran to define and to agree and to synchronize the steps, this would be normal, legitimate, and realistic.
Okay, here's to both of you from Mike Day. I understand the desire to start with non-controversial topics such as maritime security, protecting oil infrastructure, and environmental cooperation. But the situation in Yemen is urgent and desperate, and progress on this issue will pay massive dividends. Saudi Arabia has signaled a willingness to adhere to a ceasefire. Is Iran prepared to push the Houthis to do the same, and particularly to end their offensive on Marib? And what can Saudi Arabia and the US do? Dr. Abdulaziz.
Okay. Let me tell you what is the Saudi interest in Yemen. How do you wish to see it there? We would like to have a safe border, safe maritime maritime issues. At the same time, we do not wish to see any external military bases in Yemen that can represent a threat to Saudi Arabia. We're not fully responsible for the reconstruction of Yemen or any decision that related to the military act on Yemen. At the same time, the South Yemen, if they would like to have their own, back to their own independency, May 1990, before they merged together under the UN referendum, I think they should have the choice, to vote for that one. And we'd like to maintain and keep all agreement that has been signed before between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. This is our. Now, to achieve that goal, we need to have a guarantor. Who is the best guarantor than the US? The US today is very much focused on two issues. Humanitarian delivery, which we are willing to do it, and we are continuing to do that one, and we have not stopped any military, any sort of humanitarian supply and aid. At the same time, the US is concerned to keep fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda there, which we have a same goal with them, with that one. But if the US became a guarantor, for, all the issues that I have mentioned, I am sure then we move to a better progress. Iran, again, have invested this little, but also gain a lot in terms of disturbing Saudi Arabia and making the cost for Saudi Arabia on the border. This is a national security issue for Saudi Arabia. We have 1,450 kilo with Yemen. and is not only just reinstalling the legitimate government and so, which is under the 2216, the Security Council is there, but at the same time, it is our national security interest that we need to defend and to keep it. So if Iran stops supporting, if I give you the latest statistic today, we have 355 missiles that came out of the Houthi to Saudi Arabia, and this is what they have launched, the ballistic missile, at least 510 drone, 65 boats, mine boats, floating mines, and then almost 96,000 Katyusha. This is the amount of attack that came from the Houthi towards Saudi Arabia. Yet Saudi Arabia have maintained quite an important balance there. I think what we need to see is strong, and I honestly like a lot, Tim Lenderking. I'm sure he's going to do his best for his job, and I wish him all the best. He was in Saudi Arabia. He's going to Oman and to UAE, Kuwait, to the region. And I'm sure US intervention can bring an important solution, because for Iran it's important, and for Saudi Arabia it's important. And also for the region, the Yemeni have suffered a lot in terms of humanitarian, economic, development, all these issues. They need to end this, and next month we will be completing 6 years of such a war there. And it's a war of necessity. If it wasn't a war of necessity, Saudi Arabia would have never want to launch a rocket to that country.
Ambassador Mousavian, can you imagine the Iranian government agreeing to the United States being the guarantor in Yemen?
First of all, I really like to see a relation between Iran and Saudi, that Riyadh and Tehran, they consider each other's security like its own security. We need to reach to a situation to consider Saudi security as our own security, and vice versa. This is number one. Number two, I believe the war on Yemen started on a miscalculation. The first day Saudi Arabia launched war on Yemen, I with some other friends, we were in Berlin with late Jamal Khashoggi, and we had a dinner over there. It was a think tank discussion. And I told Jamal, this is a big mistake because it would take a long time and you are not going to have a good end. And Jamal told me, Hossein, you are making a mistake. This would take only 1 week, finish. I believe this was really based on a miscalculation. And now the worst humanitarian disaster, and Yemen has been destroyed practically. Number three, I don't believe, I have a different idea compared to Abdulaziz. I don't believe, Abdulaziz, the US is a good guarantor. You just give me one example. During the last 70 years, the US has been able to manage a crisis in this region. Arab-Israeli peace process for 70 years, now is disaster. Attacking Iraq, disaster. Attacking Afghanistan, disaster. The US has never been able to resolve a crisis in this region through diplomacy and peace. The only crisis was resolved through diplomacy. It was Obama Iranian nuclear crisis, which Trump destroyed. Therefore, even you cannot trust, if the US can manage a crisis through diplomacy, the US would be committed to follow. We saw about JCPOA. I have a very different idea. Maybe Abdulaziz would not agree, I can understand, but I really believe if there is a direct confidential negotiations between Tehran and Riyadh, this is the fastest way to finish the Yemen crisis. When you go, I support multilateral approach. The UN Security Council members, the US's member, the representative, but they are negotiating for 6 years. They are negotiating for 6 years. And the key players are clear. Who are the key players over there? I suggest to have, when I said to revive the security pact as one of the most immediate steps, we have the security pact between Iran and Saudi. It worked really well. If it is revived, we have a joint security committee already. They had a lot of meetings during King Abdullah. If they have such a direct negotiations and talks confidentially, I think Yemen can be resolved in 1 month.
Yeah, but at the same time, sorry, Deborah.
No. I just want to read the article that comes out of this, but please go ahead.
Why not Iran take the initiative without agreeing to tell the alliances and the militia that they support the Houthi, stop this, and do it as a first step gesture from your side? Because I think if you're in the Saudi position, you cannot agree to reward an interventionist policy by bringing the side that have supported a militia, overthrown a legitimate government, to bring them into the table and to have a direct negotiation. But if the Iran have that much influence over the Houthi, they can take the initiative themselves and tell the Houthi, stop launching rockets in Saudi Arabia, go into the negotiation table, with under the UN auspices, find the solution and stop that war.
Abdulaziz, the UN representative, was in Tehran and he was told by the Iranian officials that Iran is ready to support a type of peace, first as a ceasefire, but by both parties. Stop attacking each other. Immediately enter a negotiation talks. It is a 4-step or 4 principles. The details is with the United Nations Security Council representative. You know about it. But the first and the most important proposal Iran has made is for Houthis, Saudis to stop, first of all, to have a ceasefire and then to start a talk.
Okay, let's move away from Yemen because I can see that there's a lot, and we're not going to solve it. We're just not. If we were, I would keep going, but we're not. This is a question from Heidi Lane. Does the recent Abraham Accords and the closer relations between Israel and some Gulf states make it easier or make it harder to build further support for some of the things that you're talking about? Let's start with Dr. Abdulaziz.
From a Saudi perception, we did not have the relation with Israel. I think we felt that this is a sovereign decision regarding United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to have whatever normalization relation. I think the key difference here, Saudi Arabia would like to have first peace and then normalization. UAE and Bahrain felt that having normalization may help to push toward peace. And I think this is the key gap on the subject.
And Ambassador, there may come a time that the Saudis join this. Perhaps the older generation is against, but the younger generation appears to be for. Will it make a big difference?
When Abdulaziz and I, when we wrote the op-ed, one of the principles is about preserving sovereignty. This is a sovereignty issue. If anyone at a country wants to have a type of relation with this country or that country, it is a sovereignty issue. This is one. Whether they want to have relation or not, this is their decision. Second, I really don't believe this would help to the security and the stability of Persian Gulf about Israeli interference or such a diplomatic ties. And Israel for 70 years has not been able even to resolve this crisis with Palestinians. How they want to bring peace to Persian Gulf? After 70 years, they just killed the two-state solution. Hundreds of UN resolutions, they destroyed easily. Look at the situation of Egypt after diplomatic ties with Israel. Today, Egypt is in more powerful situation after 40 years of diplomatic ties with Israel, or Jordan. They are in disastrous situation. I don't believe Israel is helpful. If they could, at least they could prove on Palestinian issues after 70 years of negotiation and diplomacy with Palestinians.
Let me close out with a question that might be easy. And that is, many are asking, is it possible to have a cultural exchange? Could you imagine that Saudi academics, even Dr. Abdulaziz from your outfit, somehow go to Tehran and sit in a think tank there? Ambassador Mousavian, can you imagine Iranian scholars coming to Riyadh or Jeddah or wherever and, feeling safe enough and to have open discussions? Is that possible soon?
I believe this is something which the leaders can really decide soon, because peoples to peoples relations, civilian relations, And one part we have each year, we have tens of thousands of Iranians, they go for Hajj pilgrim. And why we cannot have academics, journalists, cultural, the people, I mean, in different sections, those people who are working on Corona in our health ministries, why the people, they cannot, specialists, the professionals, they cannot sit together to talk together. This is maybe a good way to start.
Dr. Abdulaziz, somehow it feels to me that
answer also to that one, you know, from my point of view, we have a project supported by the German Foreign Ministry called Tafahum, where all the 9 countries, the 6 GCC plus Iraq, Iran, Yemen, more than 150 participants from all, you know, 9 countries have participated. We discuss about the long-term relation between the region and also Iran there. We have the economic issue, political, security, cultural, and also sport, youth, women, all subjects that we have been discussing. And it's quite successful. You know, we've had a great success on that, you know, program. And with tafahum, you know, tafahum in Arabic, it means understanding. So that's the sort of understanding we're putting. And I think, you know, before when relation was okay with both sides, we've had some Iranian scholars visit Saudi Arabia. Some of them, they have been some of the Gulf universities, whether in Kuwait or UAE and Bahrain as a visitor on that one. We've had some students from Saudi Arabia also, they studied, you know, their master program in Iran. So I think the principle of having a better understanding, of course, you know, in terms of culture, and nothing bigger or more important than the 1.2 million Iranian used to visit Saudi Arabia for pilgrims, you know, issues. You know, that was a big, you know, cultural exchange that we had between both.
it's nice to stop on a positive note, especially when it's about the Middle East. I would like to thank both of you, and I hope you can continue to write these articles, because I think that they shine lights on things that people are not thinking about. So thank you, Ambassador Hossein Mousavian, and thank you, Dr. Abdulaziz Al Sager. And I'm going to turn this back over for the commercial to Ambassador Silliman.
Deborah, thank you very much. I want to thank our speakers and our moderator for a truly fascinating discussion, which has helped me better understand both the opportunities and some of the attitudinal problems that are going to make this a much a complicated path forward. For all of you in the audience, you'll be able to watch a recording of this discussion on AGSIW's website. Again, that's www.agsiw.org. So if you have friends who would find this interesting, please send them to that website over the next couple of days. You will also find there our extensive library of written material in both English and Arabic, and video recordings of many of our previous programs covering the relations of the states of the Gulf with the United States, with each other, and with the rest of the world. Thank you all again for participating in our session. Thank you for Ambassador Mousavian, Abdulaziz Al Sager, and Deborah Amos.
Thank you
for
very much.
a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Until next time.